Before we dive into JavaScript programming, I wanted to say a few words about what JavaScript is and why you should care. First, JavaScript is used primarily for web pages. In other words, it's a programming language that runs inside the browser, inside Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Firefox or Safari and so forth. And the main purpose is to make the web pages more interactive or to get updates from the server so that you can change the content that's in the web page without reloading the page. This is called AJAX. We'll discuss that later. Now, the use of JavaScript is growing in contexts other than web browsers. In other words, you can run JavaScript on the server. Node.js is a popular package for doing that. And you can run JavaScript just on the desktop. Mozilla Rhino is a popular package for doing that. But nevertheless, the primary use right now, the vast majority of JavaScript applications are for web pages, where the JavaScript code runs inside a browser and interacts with the HTML of the web page. Now, a good reason to start with JavaScript is that JavaScript is simpler than most other programming languages. Now, this is a little bit arguable because the definition of simplicity is not very objective, but still, most people think that JavaScript is a much smaller and easier language to get started with than Java or C# or C++. So it's a good starting point for beginners. Now, not everyone agrees on how you can measure programming language use, but by most objective measures, JavaScript is the second most popular programming language, second most widely used programming language in the world behind Java. Now, speaking of Java, despite the similarity in names, Java, JavaScript, they really are not closely related. So, for instance, for web applications, Java programmers would run Java on the server and JavaScript on the browser. But .NET programmers would run C# on the server and JavaScript on the browser. And Rails programmers would run Ruby on the server and JavaScript on the browser. And PHP programmers would run PHP on the server and JavaScript on the browser. And there are some Python web applications, they would run Python on the server and JavaScript on the browser. And the syntax of Java and JavaScript are dramatically different in most ways. Some of the basic constructs are the same, but they overlap also with C++ and C#. Now, this video series tries to show you how to get started with JavaScript and then how to apply it effectively. However, this video series is not a complete reference to the entire JavaScript language. For that, you want some online references. Now, the interesting thing about JavaScript is there's not an official site that gives the definitive specification for the JavaScript versions that are actually used in real browsers. Now, this is a little unusual. In the Java world, there's a definitive specification, and all Java implementations have exactly the same objects and exactly the same methods. In the Python world, for a particular Python version, all implementations have exactly the same objects and exactly the same methods. Same thing for C++, same thing for C#. But in the JavaScript world, there is a kind of a specification called ECMAScript, but the actual implementations by browsers vary dramatically from the ECMAScript specification and even vary moderately substantially from each other. In other words, the version of JavaScript that's in Google Chrome is slightly different than the version in Firefox, is slightly different than the version in Internet Explorer. Now, the browsers have gotten a lot more consistent in recent years, and they're closer to each other, but they're not exactly the same, which is very frustrating. And so one of the reasons that I will promote the use of jQuery later is that jQuery is a library that under the hood checks for browser differences and adapts so that you write the code exactly the same way in jQuery, but under the hood it does something slightly different. So my point here is that there's more than one online reference, and there's no single online reference that's definitive. However, the top two, if you bookmark those, they're a good starting point. And in fact, most of the time, you just Google a specific topic. You don't start at the tutorial and try to drill down. None of these tutorials are definitive. These are not the official specification. And so occasionally, one of the tutorials is missing something or has something that's not supported by all browsers.